Hey YouTubers, welcome to DigiTalks. Today I want to talk about the upcoming Xbox Elite Series 2 controller and ask myself the question, is it worth me upgrading from my Series 1 Elite controller to the Series 2 Elite controller? At £160 a pop, it's a fair decision to be making. And whilst I'm asking myself, should I upgrade from a Series 1 Elite controller to a Series 2 controller, I guess there's a lot of people out there too that are asking themselves the question, should they upgrade from a standard controller to a Series 2 Elite controller? It's quite a layout, so it's definitely a question that needs to be answered with some thought. So the best way for me to do this was really to remind myself why I bought an Elite Series 1 controller in the first place, look at the benefits that the additional functionality and pedals and so on has on my gameplay with the Series 1 controller, and then compare that very quickly to the Series 2 controller and see whether those marginal improvements are going to be worth my investment. Now, I'm not going to spend an awful lot of time selling and marketing the Series 2 controller. I think Microsoft do an awful lot better job of that than I could, so I'll leave that video running in the background. But I will be talking about each of those key additions to the Elite controller separately in terms of how they worked out for me. So let's start with the most obvious, the paddles, the 4 extra buttons on the bottom of the controller. When I bought the Series 1 controller, the standard controllers were not programmable, so you couldn't map the buttons. So I got the advantage of being able to map the buttons to suit my own style and gameplay, and also map those pedals on the bottom. So I didn't have to take my thumbs off of the sticks to carry out actions that required me to push buttons with my thumbs. My fingers were always hovering over the paddles, and the paddles were programmable. I could make them do whatever I wanted them to do. So I could keep my thumbs in place, I could push those buttons. It meant two things. It meant it was more efficient, I didn't have to keep taking my thumb off the stick, and two, it was an awful lot quicker for me because the button was there ready to go regardless of what my thumbs were doing. Now, in principle, the concept's brilliant on this. It absolutely did what I wanted it to do. It gave me access to those additional buttons without having to remove my thumbs from the sticks. However, the Microsoft layout for those pedals on both the Series 1 and the Series 2 was a bit of a problem for me. For me, I found that I only then had my little fingers available to grip the joystick, the controller itself, and the other 2 fingers that I would normally be using to grip the controller were now hovering over some paddles. So when I got into the heat of battle, I'd sometimes find that I'd hit those paddles accidentally. It's a really tiny movement required to action those paddles, so it was really easy for me to do, and that actually had an adverse effect, a negative effect on my gameplay, because I'd find in the heat of battle I'd be doing things that I didn't intend to do. And I tried and worked really hard to get used to just gripping the controller with my little fingers and using the other 2 fingers on the paddles, but I found that really difficult. So it's the same with the Series 1 and the Series 2. I got around this problem, however, by investing in a set of Scuff Paddles, which move the paddles from underneath your fingers on the areas where you'd usually grip the controller to underneath the controller itself. For me, that solved the problem immediately. I mean, it's a great thing, this Scuff edition, because it's literally just a battery cover with the paddles on it. So it's a really simple change. You take off the old battery cover, you just replace it with the new battery cover, it slips in place, the paddles are there on the bottom as opposed to where the grips are, where your fingers for the grips are, and for me that solved the problem immediately. I'm now able to grip the controller nice and firmly with at least 2 fingers and have that 3rd finger available to slide across the 4 buttons on the bottom of the controller. So the paddles are a huge feature benefit for me in the Series 1 controller. It's the same layout on the Series 2 controller, but I have a solution which solves it for me. Now, I've watched a few videos of some people that prefer the Xbox Microsoft layout of those pedals, and then others that can prefer the Scuff type layout of the pedals. Me personally, the Scuff type layout solved a big problem for me. I rarely find myself pushing those buttons accidentally now. I've got plenty of good grip on the controller, so that is a huge opportunity feature for me, and definitely one of the main features of wanting to have an Elite controller in the first place. So the next reason I moved to buying the Series 1 in the first place was because of the quick release changeable thumbsticks. I found myself overreacting quite often on the thumbsticks, and with the Series 1 controller at the time, you were able to change the way the thumbsticks reacted to your movement. So you could make it more aggressive, you could make it smoother, you could make it slower, and that was all done through the software on the Xbox. But you also got these other thumbsticks which had longer shafts on them, so you could change the length of the stick, and again that just helped to fine-tune your own muscle movement versus movement of the stick setup. And again, that for me definitely solved a problem. I was able to fine-tune the way the sticks responded to movement in the first place, and then fine-tune again the length of the stick, so for comfort and for movement, that also made a big difference. So the tension on the Series 2 thumbsticks for me is also a great addition to the Elite controller, because whilst I've managed to improve my gameplay through the use of the different thumbsticks, the length of those thumbsticks, and the programming of the way the thumbsticks respond, having that additional 3-step tension adjustment for me is just that added extra which gives you a little bit more control, or at least a little bit more personalized feel to how you want to use those sticks in various games. So that was a big thing. I've talked about the mappings and the bindings and how important that was when binding the paddles, but actually I think the mappings and the bindings has got another benefit. With the Series 1 controller you get 2 options, 1, 2, so I can set it up for PUBG, and I can set it up for Apex or PUBG and Fortnite, or PUBG and Forza, whatever I want to set the joystick up for. It seems that with the Series 2 controller, the magic number is 3. You get 3 adjustments to your hair trigger, you get 3 adjustments to the tension on the thumbsticks, you get 3 adjustments or config settings to how you want to set the bindings up. And again, I think this is a really great feature. I think that having the ability to switch between one game or the other, or config on one game or the other, is really useful. So, you know, I do switch between playing PUBG or playing Apex or playing Forza. So actually having the third config setting available at the push of a button on the Series 3, I think is another great feature, and definitely something that plays into my thoughts about whether or not I should upgrade. The other thing I found with the Series 1 controller, which was a key feature, was the rubberized grips on the back of the controller. I get quite excited and there's a lot of adrenaline pumping while I'm playing my games, and I get sweaty palms. Very nice. And so having the textured rubberized grips on the bottom made a big difference. It meant that I was more in control and had a better grip on the controller in general. Although the top of the controller is a really nice silicone-like texture, it's not textured and it's not rubberized like the bottom of the controller. So I still find that on the Series 1, my sweaty palms will slide a little bit over the top of this. And that's been resolved in the Series 2 because they've basically just taken the textured, rubberized and wrapped it all the way around. So I think that's another great feature. I think that's definitely something they've learned from feedback, and I think that's going to make a big difference. It would make a big difference to me with my sweaty palms. So hair triggers. Now I thought when buying the Series 1 this would be a great thing, because it meant that I thought I'd get quicker reaction time for having to move the trigger less, and that's the point and purpose, and yes, it does do that. But then I discovered with games like PUBG, where you have a trigger for shooting and you may use that same trigger for acceleration in a car, in one of the vehicles for example, with the hair trigger switched on I was finding I was only getting half acceleration or less than half acceleration. Now the hair triggers also on the Series 2 come with 3 stages, so you can have it either very close range hair trigger or a bit more movement or full movement. But in something like PUBG, where your trigger finger is also a throttle pedal, then that's still going to be a problem. You're still not going to be able to achieve full throttle unless you switch that off. And actually switching it on and off through this switch at the back is not something you can do in-game. So that kind of negates that opportunity in something like PUBG, unless of course you have hair trigger on one side and then you just remap the throttle to the other trigger on the other side, in which case you still get your hair trigger and you still get your full throttle. So yeah, absolutely, that's something that some people are really going to benefit from. Not something I use a great deal, but definitely something that people will benefit from. One other feature that was announced in the Series 2 is having Bluetooth available through the controller. So the Series 1 controller doesn't have Bluetooth. So if I'm using a controller with my Mac, for example, then I have to use a standard controller. I don't get to use my Elite controller, which is my favourite controller. So with the Series 2 having Bluetooth available, then that means I'm going to be able to configure my Elite controller any way I want it, and I'm going to be able to use it on my Mac in exactly the same way I would use it on my Xbox. So again, another great feature, another great addition to the new controller. And finally, the internal rechargeable battery. So I just bought a charger pack for my Series 1. I plugged in that chargeable battery, and then I plug in a micro USB to charge that battery. I've always got plenty of juice. I think it's a good feature or a good addition that they've incorporated the chargeable battery into the Series 2, which just means you just don't have to go out and buy the charge pack. So you could argue that it's more cost effective for that reason, but just also more efficient for that reason. However, one of the other features you get with the Series 2 is that when you put the controller back in the case, you can plug the case in. So when you're not using your controller, it goes back in the case. It's nice and neat and tidy. You can plug a USB to USB-C into the case, and the case then charges the internal battery in the controller. And if you're if you're moving around and you're carrying this thing around with you, you can take a battery pack. So you could always charge from a battery pack to the case, to the controller, if you're on the move, which again is another great feature. So whilst not a major thing for me, because I tend to not move around a great deal, with my controller at least, it's definitely something that some people are going to find advantageous. So they're the key reasons and features behind why I moved to an Elite controller and the difference with the Series 2 controller, which enable me then to ask myself that question. Am I going to upgrade from my Series 1 controller to a Series 2 controller? For me, it's a simple answer. The answer is yes. It is a lot of money, but I am a tech nerd, like a lot of you guys out there will be too, and I always want the latest tech. I am very much of the opinion that even marginal gains in efficiency of use and ease of use are worth taking on board and making best use of. So for those marginal gains I'll get with the Series 2, I will be forking out the extra money and upgrading to them. And bottom line, I love my Series 1 Elite controller. It does all the things I needed it to do one way or the other, even with a little bit of customization, which is great. It's a really customizable device. It does make my gameplay better, and it does enable me to improve my gameplay enough, so it offers me an opportunity to just try and keep up a bit with the other gamers out there and players out there. I'm not going to be as fast in thought and as dexterous and fast in coordination as a lot of people. So having those additional benefits is just going to enable me to enjoy my gameplay, because I'm doing my best to keep up with those guys out there. So I hope this has been really useful to you. I hope that has enabled you to answer the question yourself. Is it worth upgrading from a Series 1 to a Series 2, or is it worth spending all that money to go to a Series 2 from a standard controller? If you did get what you wanted out of this video, please remember to like or dislike and let me know what I could do to improve these videos. Don't forget to share, and don't forget to subscribe. The more subscribers we get, the more videos I'll be making. Thanks very much for listening, and go well.